Hi, Jesse.
Good morning.
How are you? How is Madrid treating you?
I'm good. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish, so I'm sorry this is in English. A lot of English people are monolingual, and it's not good, but that's the fact. So I'm sorry that you have to listen in translation, those of you who are listening in translation. But yeah, I'm very honored and pleased to be here.
Amazing. I think what we want to get a sense of how you got here in a way. How did you end up becoming a screenwriter? Because, as I said before, your background is in politics. How did you go from politics to screenwriting? How do you think this background has shaped the way in which you approach screenwriting?
I'm also feeling intimidated because before we came on, the director of the building and institute here said that they've had lots of successful talks here, including Red Hot Chili Peppers and Almodovar. And I think we've got to try and be a mixture of Red Hot Chili Peppers and Almodovar, right? So I'll try and be exciting and informative. So, yeah, I was a very bad political advisor or researcher. I was not good at that job, but I worked for a politician, a Labour politician, for a little while just before Tony Blair, British Prime Minister, became Prime Minister. But I was low in the organisation. I never was in very high-level meetings. But I think it did give me a feeling of what it's like to be in the room around powerful people, to see how people adjust their personalities, their beliefs, everything to fit in with an organisation, and how even if you don't share every instinct and belief of the organisation, could be a corporation or a political organisation that you find yourself in, that you end up oftentimes adopting the values of the corporation or the institution you're part of. It's a very natural human thing, I think, to accommodate yourself to power, and it can be, I guess it can be useful, but it's also quite a scary factor about human beings, our ability to fit in. You know, you're nodding a lot.
I'm nodding a lot. Makes a lot of sense. No, I think it's really interesting because then we're going to see a scene from In the Loop, and you see how this background is very present in a lot of things that you have written. But you didn't go to film school, and just to get a sense of like, what was your film school? How did you learn the craft?
Sure. I guess my film school was watching films, watching TV, and in particular, most of my career has been working with Sam Bain, another writer, my longtime collaborator, and obviously on Succession I have a writer's room, so in a way I'm used to collaborating. And that was our film school. We met doing a creative writing course at university, just a little module, not a whole long course, but just a few classes. And after we both left university, we would write letters to each other, it was before email, and we would, then when we both lived in London, and he worked in a video shop, and I worked painting and decorating just to earn money, we'd just talk about the shows that were on at the time. You know, the big shows in the UK at that time were like Seinfeld and Simpsons, and then more little UK shows, Spaced, and smaller shows. And I think, you know, you with you probably all the writers, directors, producers in this room, you have your little group of collaborators, and that's your, as well as everything you learn academically, that's your film school, right? Your taste grows in that little group, and hopefully that taste is something which will sustain you as you try to make your work in the world.
I love that you mentioned The Simpsons and Seinfeld as something that inspired you.
Yeah, I mean, there are two things, right, which oftentimes the things which are very popular are not the best, but sometimes the very popular things are the best, and I think Seinfeld and those maybe the earlier seasons of The Simpsons, it used to be incredibly good writing and good tutorial for writers who are trying to think, especially in those half-hour comedy or spaces. And we talked about films as well, Sam especially is a real film, I was going to say nerd, but maybe a buff, film buff. And so a lot of his references, he taught me a lot about cinema and film, more well-respected directors and just comedies too. So that was our film school, talking to each other.
That's amazing. And how did you go from that to, okay, let's write something. That's what we're going to write.
He'd written something. He came out of, people are often interested when I talk to screenwriters and other creative people about how to get in. I didn't have any connections into the world of film or TV. He kind of did. They didn't really help us directly, but his dad had been a director, TV director, famous 1970s show Upstairs, Downstairs in the UK, and his mum had been a sitcom actor, and so we didn't get many introductions into the industry that way, but I think he did know, oh, you can earn a living. That's a possibility to make a living by being a writer, a screenwriter.
And like that first moment when you say, okay, let's write this, you had never written before. How did you approach the process? Not having gone to film school or not knowing things, which I think it can be very freeing to not have that background, because in a way you can approach screenwriting in a very intuitive way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hardly remember. We wrote prose first, when we met. That was the class we were doing, was just writing fiction. And writing those first scripts, yeah, I think it's interesting. We used to go on the internet and find the right format. Now you probably have to pay Final Draft or one of these other programs, and they'll help you. But yeah, I think we're not going to watch any of Peep Show, but that was the show that I really learned so much on. It's a UK sitcom, shot quite unusually, where you see what the characters are looking at and you hear their thoughts as well. And that is an idea that I don't think I would do now if I was going to write a sitcom. It's the sort of idea that you come up with when you're a kid or a young person and you're full of ambition and ideas. But it made filming that show very, very, very difficult to shoot everything, so you're looking down the barrel at the characters. But it's the sort of thing you do, right, when you're a bit younger, you do stupid things, and then you're like, oh shit, we've got to make 9 series of this, or we discovered we were going to make 9 series of it. So that youthful ignorance, I think, has some costs, because you don't know some stuff, but it has tremendous freedom as well, and that writing a screenplay where somebody turns into a bird and thinking, we'll give that to the director and they can figure it out, is sometimes a good liberation, not to know exactly how you're going to do something or how the director is going to do something.
And most of the things you've written are collaborations, especially at the beginning. What do you think how did you approach the collaborations? How did you work together, for example, with Sam? And how do you think each of these collaborations has shaped the way in which you think about filmmaking or TV writing?
There's lots of good things about collaboration. I write alone, so everything is the stuff I write for the screen is for product of me and the laptop or the typewriter. The collaboration I find is really useful for plotting, getting the shape of the story, because I find it hard to get the idea and also to change the idea and to not be scared of holding on to the old idea to figure there could be a new way of doing this story. And also when you're starting out, and this is really, really important, probably not, I think the people in this room are a little bit more established, and but maybe we all have this problem, finishing and not procrastinating, not finding other things to do, interesting things on the Twitter or the internet to look at. Sounds like everyone still has that problem a bit. But if you have somebody who you know, and it could be a producer, it could be a director, but often for me it was a fellow writer. If you have someone and you say, okay, by Friday I'm going to send you the draft, or my half of the script, or my quarter of the script, it's good, because all of us writers write. We look back, guess what, it's terrible. All our hopes and dreams are lying in ashes on the floor, and we want to stop writing forever. But if you have somebody who you trust, who you like, and you can write the email going, sorry, I know it's all shit. Here it is. And if they're a nice person and you have a good collaboration, maybe you get that email back going, it's not all shit, you know. It's there's some problems, but I love this, I like that. And I think that was probably quite important to both of us early on, to have somebody saying, hey, no, this is good, this bit is good, I love this made me laugh. And when you're not earning money and maybe the producers and the meetings you have aren't yet saying all positive things, to have someone around saying, hey, this is good, is so, so important. And if you can find those collaborators who are don't tell you everything's brilliant, because we know it isn't, but will give you good feedback that helps you, that's a really important person in your creative life, to have someone who you can trust to tell you what's good and what's working in your stuff.
I love that you talk about procrastination. It's such an important thing in a screenwriter's life, right? Do you procrastinate?
Afraid so, yeah.
And you also talked about deadlines, which I think are really, really important. And if we didn't have them, sometimes you wouldn't even start writing. Even you can have a lot of ideas, but there's nothing pushing you forward. So in your first collaborations, when you started writing Peep Show, and did you already have a sense of the tone you wanted? Because I feel like everything you write is very particular. How do you work on tone?
I think tone is one thing. I don't know if you can work on it. Do you? I mean, you can, sometimes people ask me especially about Succession, because I can see it has an unusual tone, some comedy, some drama, some satire, broadly speaking. But there's no way you can sit down and say, right, I'm going to add 40% drama, 30% satire, 20% comedy. Where's my satire pen? That comes out of you. That's one of the things you'll bring to your projects, I think, is your tone. But often we don't know what our tone is, right? We discover it, or we start out writing and we think we're writing an Almodovar film, or we think we're writing Seinfeld. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because guess what? Your Almodovar film won't be an Almodovar film. It'll be your thing, and our episode of Seinfeld turned out to be something very different. So I don't think it's bad to have models in your head, but your tone is something that you'll discover, and hopefully you find those pages where you're like, yeah, that's me. That's what I want my work to be in the world, and you can, I guess, write towards that and away from the stuff which feels like, oh, that was when I was trying to write a movie or a TV show, like I've seen all the other movies and TV shows, and there's useful things to learn, aren't there, about structure. But the things which feel more generic, we were saying this before, are not so useful to you or the audience. You want your tone, and that is going to be inside you. It's just finding it.
We were talking about this before, the idea that in order for something to work, it has to be specific. But I think this is even more important for comedy. Like, comedy is always very specific, right?
Yeah, and everyone notices that, right? It's the things which make people laugh often are moments where you thought, oh wow, I didn't know everyone else thought that or felt that way, and then there's a laugh of recognition of, oh wow, we're all a bit similar, and we've all noticed that small thing. So yeah, I think specificity is very important. And also we found, especially doing Succession, I think we did a lot of research, so I think it is quite a good portrayal of those rich people's lives. But most of us, before I'd done the show, I don't know how a big deal gets put together. But if you get the details right, and if you've done the research, I think it transmits itself to the audience anyway. And that probably goes for whether you're writing a thriller on a submarine or a police show. If you don't really know the details of that world, it transmits itself to the audience, and you start feeling, oh, I'm not sure they know what it's like in a police interview. And if you do know the specificity of the detail, oh, they start recording now, and now they have to stop and offer them a drink or whatever, all these details become really useful to you as a screenwriter, and it stops you being that generic writer who does the scene that you've all seen 100 times, because you've got all this stuff to draw on. And you can find research in any area, pretty much.
I love that you're talking about research. I wanted to ask you about what do you do? What are your tools to approach research? Like, do you interview people? Do you like observe? Do you introduce yourself in like secret societies? What's your work?
I'm mainly books and magazines. It's quicker, it's easier, and I think there's also a thing. Occasionally, I've done when I was doing Succession, especially, someone would offer to invite me to meet a powerful person, usually a man, usually sort of bankers and finance people or media people. I didn't do it. I did it a couple of times, and you get a strong feeling in the room of what it's like to be in that world. And I'd write notes as they spoke a lot, and powerful people often like telling you all this stuff about their world. And I'd write and write and write and write and write, and I'd come out at the end feeling, oh, I've got the magic, the real story, and it would say like, a big deal is really tough. You're like, I know, it felt so real in the room what he was telling me, and I felt so inside. But the things they say are kind of often platitudes, or but then if you read the biographies and the long, especially American journalism, those long essays. This is especially for Succession world. There's so much detail, so much you can get from those. And it saves you time, and you don't feel gossipy or bitchy. It's like being a researcher, and I like that feeling of a little bit of distance. I'm not so caught up in the personalities. They become types, and it becomes information. Maybe there may be other projects if you're doing a very personal story about somebody's life, and it's very important to feel every contour of their emotional life, then maybe you need to have a deep collaboration with them. But I think if it's finance or the cops or submarines, read.
So we're going to watch a scene from In the Loop. I guess for In the Loop, you didn't have to research that much because it's about the world you know really well.
It's a much higher level than I was. Okay. I think, like I said, I know the texture a little bit of the powerful people and what it's like to be outside the room, at least, if not inside. But yeah, then, I think the background was the Iraq War, and so that was something we could research and the decisions that were made, and yeah.
So we're gonna watch this scene. It's a short scene. The film is about this group of people, of politicians who are trying to take advantage of this war that might happen. And I love this scene. It's with James Gandolfini and Mimi. And it's actually two scenes. There's a little bit of an introduction, but let's watch it, and we're gonna talk about it with Jesse. So you said you were on set for this scene. What part of the scene is improv? What part of the scene was written? Can you reveal that information?
It's a long time ago now. I don't remember how much is improv. I think the heart of the scene is written. They're going to be in a room talking about this military deployment and the idea of using the child's toy as to make it comic is all there. And I think the words are the stuff around it and the scene leading into it. It was a heavily, I've worked a lot with Armando Iannucci, who directed this film, and it's co-written. I was very responsible for that scene, so I suggested if we're looking at it, we looked at it. But this, and Armando's technique is, he also did Death of Stalin and a number of other films you might know, but he's heavily improvisational, but I think most of that is scripted.
I'm curious about the little toy machine. Was that already an idea that was in the screenplay, or did you find, because maybe sometimes you find something on set and you think it's great and then you start using it?
Yeah, no, that can happen. I think that shot of Mimi Kennedy at the end where there's a girl's world, we call it in UK, that sort of weird face that girls would do makeup on. I think that was something that they found on the day, and that was kind of an extra layer to that moment when she's talking with the head next to her. But I think I was interested looking at the scene. I'm proud of the scene, and I think it probably is one of those scenes where you have a problem, which is there's quite a lot of exposition in there, right, about the situation, and she's going to meet the British minister, Tom's character, and also I guess we wanted a little bit we didn't have a huge budget, and we wanted some. I remember writing another version of that scene, which was like by an aircraft carrier, and it was something. You know, it's a comic movie, but about the lead up to a war, and it feels very much like the war in Iraq, and that was the model. And I guess we wanted somewhere for there to be some weight to what's going to happen. That the tone is frantic and comic, but it's important that someone says there are people who are going to die, like he does there, and there's lots of ways, I guess, of doing a scene that gives you some weight where someone says something like that. One way is to do it visually, and you have someone standing by an aircraft carrier, or you see the troops coming out, or you see them folding up body bags that might get used later, or something visual like that. And maybe because we didn't have the budget, we had to do it through words, and also through. And once we knew that you had to do the exposition with words. How can you make that scene funny? Well, one cheap and fun way to do it is to add that prop in, the children's toy, which makes this quite somber calculation into have a ludicrous comic feel. So I guess those are they're screenwriting tricks, really, aren't they?
Screenwriting tricks to hide exposition. It's
Yes.
like what we do all the time, right?
Yes.
Any other tricks to hide exposition?
Yeah, I think often you can be scared of exposition, so you try to throw it away. And I guess that's a decent example. Everyone has this problem. Exposition, some of it is fun and some of it is not. I guess it's always useful to maybe drive towards it rather than away sometimes. Okay, I've got to tell people there's this meeting, or there's this amount of money, or this complicated relationship, and rather than just have it thrown away as quickly as possible in dialogue, what if there's usually some human component to any interaction. In this one, there's the implication, I think, that they've had a relationship before, and that goes on. You can feel that about them being in this room privately, and she kind of touches his bum when they first meet. What can I add in for someone who's not interested in exactly what the combination on the safe is, or when we're going to meet, or those exposition-y things? What's the bit that a human will respond to? Oh, it's that they used to have a relationship, or it's funny because darkly funny that they're doing this calculation on a kid's toy. So yeah, I think sometimes maybe try not to be too scared of the exposition, and have a look. Maybe you're going to have to tuck it away and throw it away as quickly as possible. And in that, we introduce the characters in that way with the log line, because we don't want the audience to get lost. So you just do it as quickly as possible. But sometimes maybe it's worth driving towards and saying, what's the longer version of this? Is there something to enjoy in this exposition?
Super interesting. There is something in the loop that already reminds me a little bit of Succession. Obviously there's the tone, it has some similar things, even the way it's shot, or like these long talks in like corridors. So let's get into Succession. I think it has to do with it's similar because you are the one who wrote it, and there's something about your process and your view of the world that is in both things. But do you see it as well, that there is something that has to do with Succession?
Yeah, a little bit, and I loved the way that Armando shot. It's handheld, a little bit like a documentary, and then it has something to. When I pitched Succession, I pitched it as Dallas meets Feston, the Dogma Vinterberg movie. So I love that style. I think it makes things feel immediate, and Adam McKay, who shot the pilot of Succession, who also did The Big Short and Vice and Don't Look Up, he often, especially in Don't Look, in The Big Short, he likes that handheld documentary feel as well. So there's a bit of that, and then the other bit is maybe the things, way of looking at the world, which I find interesting.
So let's talk about Succession. I'm sure you've talked a lot about Succession. So, but I think the first question is, when did you start thinking of, what was the first spark? What was the first idea for Succession?
There was a long process. I first of all wrote a screenplay about the real family of Rupert Murdoch, Anglo-American, big media owner of Fox and lots of newspapers in the UK, US, and Australia. And it was an unusual form. It was like a TV play, really, an hour or an hour and a half of people in his birthday. And it was hard to get made. And it, like the many projects in this room, people have had, no doubt, development hell, and then it just went away, and we couldn't get it made. And then 10 years later, when me and Sam had finished making Peep Show, I was thinking about a show to pitch, and I was reading a lot about the media, and I read a couple of other books, one on Disney War, about the battle with Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg and a few other people inside the Disney Corporation, one about Sumner Redstone, big media owner of Paramount and Viacom, and Robert Maxwell, who became famous, even more famous maybe because of his daughter Ghislaine, and she was tied up with Jeffrey Epstein, but he was a big media owner in the UK in the 80s. Anyway, so I started reading about these other media owners and saw, wow, there's a lot of similarities, especially actually in their attitude to rather a human thing of like not wanting to face death, and they made lots of jokes about, I don't have to think about succession plans because I'm going to live forever. And you're like, yeah. And this feeling of these men who just keep looking forward and driving forward and never looking back, and have Sumner Redstone's changed his will, I think, 40 times about who would get what amongst his kids, and that feeling of power over them, and that feeling of wanting to live forever by having successors, a bloodline like a king or a queen or an emperor, and then as soon as you've chosen the person, they suddenly become, oh my God, this is my killer, this is the thing that's going to supplant me, and you start hating them, and or fearing them. And we've seen these stories all the way through history, right? The emperor or king who selects their successor, and then it feels so comfortable to give generously the power, but it doesn't feel so good in the morning when you wake up, and people are plotting in the corners and talking about when you're gone, and you take it away again. So that's a long answer, but it came from this real media family, then lots of other media stories, and realizing succession stories are good stories to steal from. You can take, and as screenwriters, I think we should be encouraged to steal, because if you can find a good shape of a story, you'll make it your own with your own voice. And everyone, lots and lots and lots of good playwrights, artists, filmmakers have taken a good story and made it their own. And if you're doing a succession story, there are almost the whole of human history and storytelling to choose from.
So I wanted to focus for a second on that screenplay that didn't work, the full documentary on Murdoch, because I feel like sometimes we focus so much on the stuff that works, and we don't talk about what's left on the way to get there, and the things that you learn from these things that didn't work. Why do you think Succession works? It obviously worked, and that script didn't work, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess so much of the power of that screenplay was from it being the real people, and for a long time I thought if you were doing a media ownership story, you would have to do I felt like it has to be real. It has to be real. That's what's important in the world, and you get a lot of restrictions as well with doing a real story. People's lives often don't fall into the shape of story, and that's why biopics sometimes have a tough time, and it's very skillful to find the part of a human story, real story, which makes a good shape, and screenwriters and directors have to do a lot of work to turn it into a good shape. And I think my screenplay would have still have been fine, but it never could have been a TV show because it didn't have the richness, and I wouldn't have felt comfortable writing fictional words for an hour at a party I could make up some fictional stuff, but having the freedom to take stories from wherever and to reshape the characters and not feel any responsibility to real human beings or the world, it was very, very liberating. Yeah.
But I read that it also happened. It also started in the media owner's 80th birthday party. Really, it's the same as the pilot of Succession.
Yes. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You have a lot of parties. You have weddings. You have funerals. You have a lot of them in the whole, the 4 seasons.
Yeah, and it's just a good way of, with a big ensemble cast, you get people together, there's pressure, often if it's an event like a wedding, funeral, baptism or something, you have a shape to it which gives the audience something familiar to expect, and then you can subvert it or not, and you naturally have all your characters there together. There was another party, and then in the loop, you can take 2 characters off, and yeah, it's not the best insight, but it's not a bad one if you don't know what else to do in your opening episode or your movie. Put people in a party and stuff sometimes happens.
It always helps. It always helps. It's much easier to introduce also the characters, because in a way, in a party, you have to introduce yourself sometimes. So we're going to watch another scene. This is the beginning of Succession, the first 5 minutes, because we want to talk about character introductions and the introduction to the world. So it's a bit strange. We have to turn
Good.
a lot. I love how he takes one puff of the cigarette and just throws it away.
The rich, what are we going to do?
Was that improv? Was that written?
I think it was either written or it was an idea on the day. I think we talked about it. The scripts have been published now, and we could have a quick look, but I can't remember whether... I can't remember.
Because there's a lot of things in here that have to do with behavior, with just like how he moves, how he acts, how he... and how much of that was like, did you find working with the actors, or how much of it was already in the screenplay and in your mind?
In this specific scene?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question. I think the actors found that, but the clues are there in the scene, right? The first scene is interesting. I was saying about the mortality thing, which attracted me to and it's there. That's what that is, right? It's a king kind of losing his powers, and in that, doing something very human and basic, pissing in the wrong place, and he's lost. It's also from research a bit that I was thinking about how many houses often rich people have and how often they move, and as I get disorientated when I'm in a new place sometimes, and how difficult that must be if you're getting to 80, 90 and you're suddenly the bathroom isn't where you thought it was. Anyway, so the physicality, I don't know how much is written in, but in a way, if you just say to Brian Cox, you're an older guy, he's playing someone older than himself, and you can't find the toilet in the middle of the night and you end up pissing in the wrong place, he knows the physicality that comes with that. He's not going to spring out of bed singing a happy tune. And similarly with Kendall, like he's an actor with a lot of preparation. He knows where the script is going. He knows this is the day. He thinks he's taking over. So that's the energy he brings to it. So yeah, sometimes it's nice to write a lot, I think, in the scene description of what the character is thinking, but sometimes it's inherent in the situation, and so you don't need to say too much about it.
So you start the show with Logan and Kendall. Why did you decide to start the show with these 2 scenes?
Yeah, I think it's both scary and helpful to know what you probably all know already about your work, is that there's a certain amount of stuff which is useful to analyze, critique, break down, and you can learn from books or other things how to introduce characters, or at what moment different things should happen in a screenplay. But the truth is that most of us come to those things instinctively, I think, and if you try to think too hard about what you should be doing, it's not necessarily the most creative way. So I suspect that I think it's right that those are just the scenes that came to me as what should start the show, you know, and then also in the edit, like maybe there's a few introductory beats, and maybe once I'd seen the whole of the pilot, you realize, okay, this is going to be a story really about Logan and Kendall in the first episode, and so it's appropriate to start with them too. But I don't think you should overthink it. Like if we'd had an amazing scene for Shiv doing something political, maybe that could have been the opening and it would have thrown you off in a different direction, and then you come to... So it works. I can see now that feels like quite a deep logic to it. It's about this man losing power, but I think that's something you feel in your gut rather than sort of, okay... Well, you could come to it that way, right? You could sit down and think, I want to do a kingly figure, a corporate leader who's losing power. What would be some good ways of showing that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He stumbles in the street. Someone doesn't recognize him who's young and he's powerful. You could do a list of them and choose one. I don't think I did do that. I think it was a gut feeling of like, okay, I think this should be the scene. But both are legitimate. You can come to creativity, can't you, through a process of elimination or structural analysis.
So when did you write the pilot? How did it work for the first season? Did you first write the pilot? Did you structure the whole season? How did you start working with your team when you got the green light?
Yeah, so the script, the pilot, that pilot is one of the, I wrote completely on my own with no input from anyone, I don't think. And then you shoot the pilot. I guess I eventually got notes from Adam and from HBO once we said that we'd do the pilot. And then there's a gap when you wait, fingers crossed, are you going to get picked up and go to series? And so we did. And then I put together the writer's room, and I tried to make it about half English, half American, half men, half women. Some people who I did know, who made me feel comfortable in the room, to make it a comfortable atmosphere, because it's important. You're going to be together a long time, talking about personal things. It's important to feel comfortable, but also a lot of people who I didn't know, some of whom brought their Americanness or some little bit of maybe knowledge of this world, or actually we didn't have so much knowledge of this world, but maybe some family situations, people had a big patriarchal father who they were interested to think about. So some stuff like that as you put the room together. And it's it's like a little bit like a party. You don't know if the party's gonna work or not. We ended up getting on very well, and the party was good, and everyone felt relaxed enough to talk and tell stories about their lives and talk about the characters in a very not always deep way, sometimes in a silly, casual, funny way, but they were very good psychological people interested in psychology, so that we could have a lot of talk about these characters, and that stuff is the kind of it's the capital you put away in the bank that you live off for years. If you know, once you've discovered interesting things about the characters, you know that stuff, and you can always return to it in a scene that feels like it's about nothing. There was that thing we once said in the room that happened to Roman when he was a boy, and they used to, pretend he was the family dog and kick him, and that's something that you can throw in, and it makes the scene suddenly feel richer, and you build up those layers and layers and layers of stuff that you know about the characters. That's one of the things a writing room is really, really useful for.
And how many people did you have in the room? How many writers?
Probably in the first season about 8, and then by the final season about 10.
Wow. And did they change a lot?
A little bit. Some people who weren't available or went off and did their own show or had other things, and then a little bit of fresh blood, and yeah. But probably at least 6 of them never changed.
That's amazing. And how do you organize your room? Like when you start thinking of a season, you get together, you brainstorm. How many episodes do you write? How many episodes do the other writers write?
So we would do, and I'm happy to talk about this sort of stuff. It's the stuff that always interests me. The exact nature of how these collaborations work. We'd do quite a short day, meet at 10, stop at 3. partly so I could look at the notes from the previous day and see what I wanted us to focus on and cut the stuff that wasn't so useful to us. Spend a nice bit of time talking to each other. What did you do last night? Mainly, what did you eat? I'm very interested in what people ate last night.
Fundamental.
Especially Americans in London. Hope it was good. And often those things you end up talking. I went to this restaurant with this friend, and they were having this weird thing. And guess what? It turns into a story that could be, that's interesting. Maybe what would happen if Kendall went somewhere and his friend was late, and then the waiter's rude, but they meet someone else, and they go to the waiter's party. You sometimes find that the stuff which is just chat turns into the show. But if it doesn't, you have a nice getting to see each other in the morning, and then talking about films and TV, some that you like, often a lot of bitching about what are the other shows and TV in the world. It's healthy for writers to bitch about their colleagues and their competitors. And then we would do, for 3 or 4 weeks at the beginning of each season, we'd try and talk only in like big terms, like what could we do, that sort of deep character, what happened to them when they were 7, why are they like this, character stuff, silly stuff, jokes, what would their band be called if Kendall and Roman had a band, what would we call it, silly jokes, deeper stuff, and the general arc of the series, what will be the beginning, middle, and end? The thing I really want, although I never force it on the room, because it's nice for it to happen organically, what I need as a showrunner is to know the end. And then once I know, and sometimes I know what I think it will be when we start the room, and I pitch it, suggest it to the room. But once that final scene, final part of the show clicks, for me, then the writing of the rest of it becomes much easier. And normally I would write the first one and maybe the last 2 in the final season. I also wanted to write the episode, a big episode, number 3, where something bad happens to Logan. I'm not doing spoilers.
I think everyone has seen Succession, right? So we can spoil things.
Very bad, right? What happens to him. He's not in episode 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
So, did you have an idea of where the final season was going to end already at the beginning of the first season?
No. And indeed, I think that sometimes I thought that Logan would die, and when I first thought of the show would die at the end of the first episode, and he does have a medical incident. And then we toyed with the idea maybe he would die at the end of the first season, but...
The first season?
Yeah. We talked about it. Yeah. But when you watch him in the show, Brian was so brilliant, and it felt like, oh no, this is a show about people revolving around this sun. So we discarded those ideas and did the shapes of seasons. So I didn't know where season 4... By the way, I didn't even know if we'd come back. If you do a TV show, you don't know, right, if you're going to be a second season. So I didn't know where it would go. I think I did always know that what the tone of the end would be. If we did this show, I knew that we were in a world where these big media companies were being overtaken by tech companies. The newspaper readership, which is sort of what Logan did when he started, is going down and down and down. That this is a world in decline, and this is a man in decline, and that his family are probably, it wasn't definite, but probably not able to take over, and if they did take over, would be a disaster. So that doesn't tell you what the ending is going to be, but it tells you what it isn't going to be and what isn't going to happen as a writer, and therefore you have the chessboard set up, even if you don't know exactly what the configuration of the checkmate is going to look like.
And going back to the idea of tone, because I think you took a lot of risks in Succession, because there are many different tones, and they all work, because it can be very comedic, but it can also be very dramatic. Sometimes for me it was hard to watch, because you see a lot of people struggling because they want to be loved, and they are not getting what they want. So there are scenes that for me are like really moving in a way. How do you manage to, how did you try all these tones? How did you manage to make them work?
Another one which is difficult to good answer to. That one is a little bit of an instinctive thing as well, and people will find their own tone. I like drama, I like comedy, and so it was natural. It's just a tone that I find natural to write. It doesn't mean that sometimes I wouldn't look at an episode or a scene or a storyline and say, oh, I think this is a bit too funny for this part of the world that we find our way into. But often you can modulate that quite easily with a tweak to a line or the character who is which characters are in the scene. But yeah, I don't have a good answer, and it is the key thing. It's what we're looking for, right? If we're writing a movie or directing a movie, writing a new TV show, the most important thing is tone. And we can borrow it from other places. Oh, it's going to be a thriller, and I know what a thriller feels like, or a comedy. But finding your own version of that tone is probably what will make you feel really satisfied, and what will make other people want to work with you again and say, oh, I want your tone. I just don't want a comedy or a thriller. I want that specific tone that you do, and it'll be different for everyone. And I guess you have to, we talked about this before, right? You have to try and find it. And it won't, sometimes you get surprised. You didn't know you were a comedy writer until someone says, can you write a comedy? And you say, oh yeah, sure, give me the money, we'll find out. And you're not everyone's going to write Seinfeld or something like Seinfeld, but everyone has a comic mode of looking at the world, and maybe it's, I liked a lot, got into the Spanish director, Berlanga, The Executioner. Like, you wouldn't know, you might not, that film is very funny, but its tone is...
It's dark.
It's dark,
yeah.
And not every scene is funny, and it has a lot of social interactions and nature of relationships too. So not everyone's comedy will be the same. You might not think you're a comic writer, but if you've never given it a go, maybe you are, and maybe you're not going to make people laugh every page, but that might be a good way to find your tone. And similarly, if you think you're a comic writer, maybe write a funeral scene and see, maybe you'll be Joe Orton or one of those people who does funny funerals.
Funny funerals, I love it. So we're going to watch one last scene. It's a bit longer, but we want to focus on it. This is the end of season 3. I'm sorry if anyone hasn't seen it. No, spoilers. It's such a good scene. There's so much happening, and what I think is amazing is how many turning points there are. I know that you approach, as you said, screenwriting in an intuitive way, but if you analyze this scene, there are so many turning points, and the characters have so many different strategies. They have to change strategy constantly, which I think makes it super interesting. How did you approach the scene?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that there is a way in which that it is quite constructed. I was very worried about that scene. I was really worried that it was like, it's the finale. I think I felt that the moment, we haven't seen it, but there's a betrayal at the end revealed. I think I always felt like if we could get that, we would have a good end to the season, but this scene was even longer than it is now, and it's in a room with quite a blank for the directors and screenwriters who are thinking about the visual. It's quite a blank box. They're quite static. It's just a verbal argument, and then you have to have a thing happen with I needed for the revelation of the mum's involvement, and there was a diversion when she was in the room or she was next door. That felt kind of, the whole scene verges on soap opera. You could see a similar scene in a soap opera telenovela, couldn't you? And that's not, I know soap writers, and there are really good scenes in soaps, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative, but I wanted other things going on than you'd have in a soap opera in terms of the comedy and the level of business. But I was very worried about it, and it was cut down quite a lot in the edit. But you're right, I guess why it was such a long scene, and I was greedy to get, is, I'm going to forget them all now, but there's there are, as you say, a bunch of turning points. They go in hard, and Logan tries one version of trying to stop them by trying to freeze out Kendall and get the other two on his side. And there's a whole variety of, as you say, emotional and business strategies which you sort of want to go through. You don't have to go through them, but I like it. I feel like it's a little bit like you're a card player, a poker player, and you don't want to leave money on the table. You've heard that phrase, like there's money on the table. It's like we've set up all this interesting situations about how Roman relates to Logan. They have a closer bond, and I want to see that tested and broken. I want to see Roman choose between his brothers and sisters and his dad. There's their relationship with their mum and their hope that she will sort of save them, and you want to see that broken. You want to see there's a moment when you're in Brian Cox's eyes when they first come in, and you see the actor. I think it's in the script, makes a calculation of like, I could just like blow up and be that Logan-y version of the guy who tells you fuck off, but he decides no, the best thing to do is to persuade them, and so he gives them the business explanation of why it is a good time to sell the company, to try and persuade them. And I wanted to see that in that, because those big, although Logan and Brian is now a bit famous for shouting fuck off, he's got that in his toolkit of ways to be in the world, but he also can explain to you he can convince you of the wisdom of a deal. He must be able to do that, and I wanted to see him try and sell that to his kids as well as, and then he decides, oh, actually, I can't reason with these people, and he tries to divide them as he so often does. So yeah, there's lots of as you say, strategies, emotional moments that I wanted to hit. And I think my fear was maybe it felt like a little bit of a laundry list of like, done that, and it didn't have that coherence of a scene. I'm glad you feel it works. I think it does just about work, but it had to have some cuts, and it also relied just on great performances, and those actors, you can turn on the camera on their faces, and mostly you're pretty interested in what they're thinking, even if the words aren't the best.
I mean, of course, the biggest turning point is when you hear that the mother has cut a deal with Logan. But for me, there's a moment that really moves me, that kind of like changes a little bit the tone of the conversation, when Roman says, what about love? Like, we come here offering love. And then it's when you kind of hit the subtext. Like, this has always been about love and power at the same time. But I think what Roman goes through in the scene is a crazy arc. He goes through a lot of things, and he finishes the scene changing strategy again, and he's begging at the end of the scene.
He is begging, and I think maybe that's the biggest clean reversal in the scene, is they go in thinking they have this power because of a technicality in the legal situation that they can stop their father selling, and then that's cut out from under them by the revelation that their mother has made a separate agreement. And yeah, I think that's the biggest turn in the scene, right? That's the most important change.
So one last question, and we're gonna open it up to the audience. Because I'm curious, because I heard you work a lot with improv, with the actors, and you change lines on set. But with scenes like this is a really like specific scene to write. There are a lot of turning points. You have to. It's very important that they hit all the emotional plot points. So how do you work on scenes like this?
Yeah, I mean, the improvisational thing for me is for extra. It's like some extra cream on the pudding, on the tart. The scene should work as well as you can make it work. I never think, oh, I don't know how to do that. But they'll improvise it on the day. That wouldn't work for me. So that scene, I think, is probably exactly as scripted, especially if you've got so many interventions and so much plot road to travel and so many different emotional turns. I think it's probably all as scripted. They will have. One of the most important things about the improvisational style, I think, is that the actors feel safe and allowed to change their own blocking, where they're standing in the scene. So that element is very much discovered in the room, and that makes quite a lot of difference, as you will know, the physical geography of who's standing and who's sitting and who's confronting one another. So that's an unusual scene that was probably almost no improvisation. Actually, a lot of the scenes, there's no improvisation, but most scenes, there would be the offer, where after we've shot the version as scripted, to do a version off script, or especially to begin the scene a few beats early with what's happening before, or carry it on a couple of beats after with what's happening, and to change some stuff in the middle. And sometimes that will be in discussion, and I'll be like, I'm not sure that this quite feels right, what do you think? And sometimes it will just be something the actor feels. Sometimes it might be a little extra joke, or I think James Gandolfini kind of blowing his face up to when he's talking about looking like a ball sack. That's him coming up with something in the moment. So it's often some extra physicality or some business with a prop that someone finds on set. So it's really useful. It's not useful unless the scene works in itself anyway. It's not going to help you if it doesn't work, but it can help a scene which is maybe a little formal or stiff live, because the actors know that the stuff which is maybe making them feel a bit uncomfortable and like they're acting, they can drop, and they can try it a different way, standing in different places, sitting in different places, and maybe saying some different things.
Okay, so we're going to open it up to the audience. You can also ask if you want to speak Spanish, I can translate, so feel free to.
And I think we have simultaneous.
Perfect.
If you want to speak
then
Spanish, I'm
have
available. I've got it.
I have two questions. First question is regarding, in the beginning you mentioned that your greatest difficulties with plotting. I was wondering if you can elaborate on that. And also the second question is, have Shakespeare's King Lear play any role, especially when it comes to mimic desire and plotting itself?
Yeah, good. No, the plotting is, I find that the hardest part of writing. I find dialogue writing sometimes tough, sometimes easy, but always kind of okay if I have a scene that I think works. I like thinking about people and characterization, so that's kind of okay. Sometimes, but the hardest thing for me is finding a plot that is really satisfying. And so that's the time when talking to a collaborator, and it doesn't have to, I could hear people gasp a little bit about how many people we have in the room, 8, 10, 12. It's a lot of people, it's a lot of money, and we can't afford to do it in the UK, and I expect most productions can't afford to do it in Spain, I should think. It doesn't have to be that number, though. For most of my career, it was just one other person, but I think the difference between 1 and 2 is enormous, and the difference between 2 and 6 or 8 is not so big, but having someone else to talk your plot idea out to is just incredibly valuable, and it's a way of finding new angles, a different way of doing it when you're getting stuck on one. They have to be at the party, and that's where we're going to meet the woman who's going to tell the person they've got the job, and no, you could do it a different way. What if they crashed their cars, or some other? There's a million ways of doing any story, but as an individual, you sometimes get locked into one version, right? And so having other people to talk to is often a good way of opening it up. And the other question, King Lear. I think as soon as you have a kingly figure, and I always imagined, the Roys as a kingly, imperial kind of family. As soon as you have a king choosing between his children who will succeed him and who will get what, I think King Lear probably comes to mind if you've ever read or seen the play. So it was probably in my mind a little bit, but it's not the Murdoch, real Murdoch family aren't the key to the show, and nor is King Lear. It's quite diverse, but that's the good thing about, as I was saying, stealing is like, you steal a bit of King Lear, but then throw it all away. You don't have to take anything other than the part that's useful to you as a writer.
Thank you.
Hello. First of all, thanks for being here. And second, thanks for cousin Greg, which I adore. And my question actually comes from there because I guess that when you were thinking about the series in the conception, you were thinking mainly about the family, the main family. And then my question is, why do you think that a character like Greg was so necessary for the series? Obviously, as we watch the entire series, we understand the importance of him. But at the conception of the whole series, how do you come with the idea of a character like him, and why?
Yeah, I think he was important because it's such a rarefied, unusual, wealthy world that the show is set in. And that's fine, you could do it with no perspective out. In a way, the show is the perspective, the camera is the perspective, the attitude is the perspective. But it's nice to have, even within the show, some eyes that represent people more like myself or you, who are going into that world for the first time and are like, oh my God, look at the marble in this room, look at how, you know, what the food that they have that they're not even eating, and like those fresh eyes are really useful to let you in to what could be. I mean, I think a lot of people did find this with the show, that there was a little bit of a barrier of like, I don't give a fuck about these horrible rich people. And I can understand that maybe Greg helps you come into the room a little bit and feel uncomfortable like he does and look around.
Thank you.
Hello, Jessie. Thank you for the talk. I was wondering, since your background was in politics and then you jump into film industry, how was that first time in a pitch meeting? Because sometimes we think, well, he went to a pitch, where a room with the pitch were in the door, but maybe it was a party or something. How was that moment where you pitch your idea and then it started to happen in the production process?
So talking about the move from politics and pitching my first project, and how did that go from without that background? Well, yeah, the pitching thing is weird, right? It's very common in the US, not so common in the UK and Spain.
It's not that common here, no.
It's very American, and I think it's a little bit cruel, right? Because often us writers become writers because we're not so comfortable going into rooms with executives talking. So guess what? To get your show away, you have to go into a room with an executive and talk. But really, most of my early career was in the UK, and in there, it was more normal system of you write something and somebody reads it, and then you go and talk about it. And I still think that's a good method. And even when I went to pitch in America, I guess people normally, hopefully, have seen some of your stuff or read something, so that you have a level of interest. But when I went to pitch Succession, I found it very stressful and very stressful. I'm not a natural pitcher, and I guess the only thing I'd give other people advice if you're doing that is you don't have to pretend too much, right? If you could just try and communicate your idea as best you can. Some people are going to show up with some audio-visual thing or a PowerPoint, but I'm not going to do that, and so I'll just try and tell you my story as well as I can, and you can't try and be other than you are, and hopefully people get that. But yeah, it's a very painful process beginning to learn to pitch.
Thank you so much.
Hi. So I have a question. You said before that you knew the direction of the ending of the show, but I want to ask, because I read a while ago like a Twitter theory about the ending, and I want to know if it's true or not. So the theory says that you could know from the beginning of the show how it was going to end by looking Tom's last name translation. If it is true or not.
Sadly not. Somebody told me this theory, I think, in Barcelona about Tom Wamsgans, the baseball player.
Yeah.
And you know, the room is made up of lots of different people. Maybe there was somewhere, someone in the room knew how we were going to end it, and so they suggested that name for us. So it's not impossible, but when we were talking about that name I think the fan theory goes that there was an amazing baseball player who did something extraordinary, and he was called Wamsgans.
Yeah, like he did one good thing in his life, and he was remembered by that. But it was kind of like an accident.
Okay. And therefore that's why we gave him that name, so that's how the end of the show would be. And that wasn't the case. I think we chose the name because it sounded like a funny name for someone from the Midwest in the US who maybe had that kind of Nordic, German or Scandinavian heritage, which some people had around the Great Lakes and where he came from. So, no, it's a good theory, but we hadn't seen the end at the beginning like that.
Okay.
Although
thank
maybe
you.
one writer did, I don't know.
Hi. So my question is regarding the creation of characters. Today you've discussed plotting, you've discussed turning points and elements like specific for screenwriting. But I was wondering, how do you approach character creation? Do you have a system? Does it vary from project to project? And I'm particularly interested in TV, because sometimes you get the chance to write like a pilot for TV or even a first season, but you don't know whether you'll be able to write about these characters again because there's no guarantees. So how do you choose what to reveal about them to make us interested in them and what to keep for later? So thank you.
I think I heard it all. You were asking about character creation, and especially for long-running series. Did you ask a specific person at the beginning that I missed?
Sorry, can you repeat? I was speaking a bit low, sorry.
So you were asking about character creation, and especially for when you think about long-running series, yeah? Yeah,
and whether you have like a system in place or it varies from project to project.
Pretty instinctive. Sometimes I have written the only thing I would say, and this is, I don't know, some screenwriting teachers might think it's bad advice. I've sometimes seen that thing of like, if you're creating a character for a movie or a show, that you should do like these 6 pages of where they went to school, what their favorite food was, where, you know, relationship with cousins and religious feelings in early years and subsequent. Maybe, and honestly, if it works for you, great, and you'll know so much, it could be fantastic. Sometimes for me, it's just enough to have a name, and you start writing, and oftentimes in the work that I've done, which often been in a professional political context, their role is very key. It's a high-up person, it's a mid-level person, it's a low-level person. And then the name, and sometimes that can be enough to get writing, and you discover it as you write, and the quirks become the person. Or steal from life. It's my mum, it's my aunt, it's my friend of my best friend, and disguise them as well as you can. So I think, like a lot of things, it's good to steal things from life, even from literature. And sometimes you know that you have a piece of casting in mind, and that tells you a lot as well, right? Because I think one of the things you're getting to is it is quite hard sometimes you have to populate a whole world, and it can be a world that you might want to sustain if it's a TV show, and how do you get the richness of characters? Well, I think you can trust that it will come, that people are interesting, and that the layers will develop as long as you don't write anything contradictory, and as long as you try to believe that they're real and not a type, you know. So even if the person is just coming in to serve drinks, or they're a housekeeper, there can be a whole movie, obviously, about the housekeeper, but in the Succession, that would be a secondary character. But it's good to try to imagine where they've come from that morning and where they might be going, because you never know. We've had a few characters in Succession who have been small, and they get bigger, and that can be very enjoyable for the writer and the audience. But that doesn't mean that at the first time you write them, you need to know all that stuff. it's just you know that just because a person has a job, that isn't their whole life, and to be alive to that possibility. And in terms of the long-running show, the same thing goes in that you hopefully you find the richness in the characters as you go. It can't be all there from day one, otherwise we'd go crazy, right? Trying to write a script and we've fully realized all of these characters in all their emotional complexity. No, you can't do it, but hopefully you leave yourself room to discover it.
My question is about Roman in the first episode and the huge change that happens to his character from the pilot to the second episode. He's married and has like this wife with a kid, and they suddenly disappear. If that was something you came up with, if it came from the studio, and I was wondering what the notes were on it and how you managed those notes, if you were happy with that change. And taking it from the first episode, I have a second follow-up question on the last episode, but if you ever took into account the hero's journey and the theory to write this, and how did that apply to Tom? And thank you.
Good. So it's true that in the pilot, Roman, I think, is wearing a wedding ring, and I don't think we say that he's married. So in my mind, I justified it that, he's a weird guy who likes to wear a wedding ring even if he's not married.
It's Roman. He could do that.
Thank you. But it is a change in that he was written in the pilot as married, and his girl, the person who's presented as his girlfriend, was his wife, and the two kids you see, I think we imagined that they were his kids, maybe. But in a way, the thing I would question about your question is, you said, his character changed. In a way, what I felt we did, because it was a change I wanted to make, not HBO, was I think I changed the facts to fit his character. It was like I wouldn't have changed anything if I felt the character was working, but I guess what I felt was like, this character doesn't feel like he's married. He doesn't feel like those are his kids. So better to change the facts than try to be like, okay, let's rewrite this guy, Roman, into being a married guy. It was like, he's electric. Kieran's doing something which is brilliant with this character, so easier to change the facts. Maybe we should have CGI'd out his wedding ring. But I think the kids and the girlfriend kind of worked, and it felt okay. And I think that is a good thing about a pilot. You can watch it and you're like, that person doesn't feel like that idea that we had. And usually with the edit and some sound, you can change it, but not if there's eagle-eyed people like you spotting our mistakes. And in terms of the hero's journey, no. I think I know that theory. I think, screenwriting books are useful if you find them useful. If you get stuff from them, either positive that you want to follow, or that you read and you think, well, that's bullshit. I like doing it like this. That's also profitable. So they can be useful to react in favor of, or react against. I've tended to sometimes feel wary that they're going to get in my head and I'm going to start writing in some way that feels not entirely myself. But I've also read a bunch. The one called Alexander McKendrick, who did Sweet Smell of Success. His book I would recommend as the most sort of, it's quite an open one. It's not very prescriptive about what you have to do. It sort of talks about technique and on story, I think it's called. But that's a good one. But I don't know much about the specifics of the hero's journey. We didn't follow that for Tom. But it's quite a traditional story, right? That the person you weren't looking at who comes from behind to win.
I think there's a question there.
Hello, I wanted to know if during the writing process you ever think about the music, because in this series especially the music has such an important role, and also if you do it in the editing, how much input do you have with the composer?
Yeah, great. It's a good question, and I was just very lucky to get Nick Britell's music. Even when we were watching that first episode beginning, I kind of like wanted to watch the titles because his music is so good. Like,
It's so good.
so
Amazing.
good. In the edit, you know, you've watched the episode 4 times, 5 times, 6 times over a couple of days, and still, before you watched the episode, I used to like to play the intro music because it sets up the tone of the show so well, and I have nothing whatsoever to credit to take. That's just Nick Britell, who Adam McKay suggested, who brought this beautiful and evocative music to it. So I guess you have as a creative person, you have the opportunity to hopefully pick your collaborator, but after that I didn't have much input. And then in the edit, you often, you know, the normal way of working is to have the temp score. So you use, in our case, we'd use some old music from a previous series from Nick, but then he always composes new music for each season. And the only thing as a writer, I always write with music playing, and or start to write, never any lyrics, and then often I find a project has a soundtrack for me that works, and for this it's always been Baroque music, you know, Handel and Vivaldi, and I think that kind of 18th century money, status, corruption, sort of ornamentation was always very useful for me getting into the headspace when you're struggling to when you're procrastinating at the beginning of the day. Makes it a little bit easier if something's going on over there.
I mean, it's very important for the tone. It's what you say. It really sets up the tone. I think there are very few shows where I watch everything, and because you usually can press skip. This one I would never do it because it really puts you in the mood for succession.
Hi. So my question is regarding characters, because I believe the series has a really well-defined characters, but what I find most interesting is when they interact with each other and the power dynamics that are built between them. And I wanted to ask you, where do you draw from to build that? Because you said you draw from politics and the Murdoch family for the characters, but I believe like if you have many sources for building the characters, how do you get those dynamics working?
In terms of for the actors when they are interacting?
I mean, for like the script, the dialogues, the interactions, the actions, I'm thinking about like, how do you think of details like in the season 2 finale when Tom is eating Logan's chicken? Those details in their interactions, where do you draw from to build that?
Yeah, I guess the writer's room is very useful for that. Like something like, there's that scene where Tom does an unusual thing and comes and eats a piece of Logan's chicken. It's sort of thing, I can't remember. Sometimes you come to that in the scene and you're like, that's what should happen in the scene. But it's also the sort of thing I could imagine coming up in the writer's room, like, hey, one time we should do a scene where somebody does something that breaks the bounds of social convention, like eating off Logan's plate. And that's a sort of idea that would float around, you might have on the wall or in the big document of ideas, and then you find, wow, that's the place to do it. So I guess it's a mixture of stuff that comes out of the, you know, it's Kendall's first day going in to work, so what are the things that would happen to him, and you follow those, and they tell you the sort of things that are going to happen. And then some other things that you maybe, the writer's room is very good for throwing up, like, oh, what if someone you know, fell over on an escalator going and caught their trousers and their trousers got pulled down or something. It's not going to be right for him going into work the first day, but it might be right for just after he's been fired and you want something humiliating to happen to him. So it's great to have that bank of weird, painful, emotional ideas to draw on.
I love the bank of weird ideas. Title with.
Hello. Hi. You talked about how difficult it is to finish a script, and I can relate to that. And how do you come up with the perfect ending for a good story? How do you come up with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess sometimes it comes early. If you're lucky, oh my God, if you know what the end of your story is, if some stories you think of because of the ending, a story where a pauper becomes a king, and that's like you're getting there, that's great. If you don't have that, like in a continuing TV show probably, because you don't necessarily know where you're going at the end, or indeed even if you're making Breaking Bad and you know that you're going to have a good, mild-mannered teacher become a meth-dealing maniac, you still don't know probably what the final image, what the final couple of scenes are that show that. And I guess I would again talk about the value of the writing room in that it lets you try out a bunch of ideas and say them, even though, and you feel the ones which your colleagues respond to, or it can just be one or two people. It could be just a producer or another writer. And you also start to feel what's organic, because you can have those days where you're like, I've cracked it, I know what the ending is, and it kind of works, but it's not organic, and often the end of a story is inherent in the beginning somehow, and if you can find that feeling of organicness, the dream is, and I feel like we sometimes found it in Succession, the dream is something organic, which is there and feels totally natural, and yet the audience hasn't quite seen yet. That's the dream. But I think you can trust that if you've got interesting characters with rich lives, that those things will be in there. It's just finding them. That's hard.
I think it's Billy Wilder who said that endings should be surprising and inevitable. So it's a little bit what you said.
But I'm reluctant to say it because it's such a tough thing to find, right, as a writer. Surprising, yeah, I've got it. And inevitable, okay, great.
Hi, I'm really curious up here. I'm really curious about knowing which character did you find the most challenging to write during the entire show, and also which character's ending was the most difficult to decide, to say, okay, this is how this character is going to end, and this is the ending point for their arc.
Yeah, good. The most difficult to write. Normally people ask me my favorite, and I feel really, I don't have one, and it sounds like I'm being evasive or not wanting to answer the question. The hardest to write, I guess, and I hope we did a good job with them, but there was a character played by Danny Houston's character, Danny Houston, the actor who came in, Laird. He's like a big banker, and it's like one of those roles where, a bit like I was saying, the housekeeper, the big banker, you want him to come in, give some exposition with a great deal of authority and this gravitas, but really that hasn't told you anything about their character. And so a character like that is sometimes quite hard to write, and you have to do any number of those tricks, like think about where they've come from, what kind of day they've had, or look hard at the exposition and say, maybe there's something interesting in this exposition, and not be scared of the fact that they feel a bit generic, and stop them feeling a bit generic. And sometimes giving them a name helps me, getting the right name starts to bring them to life, and like, oh, wow, I wouldn't have known, and it can be it's worth going through your script, and the actors that you cast will be very pleased if you go through and change every policeman one, waitress, you think of a name for them, and they suddenly start to become a bit more real, and also the actors who come in and read for it will be much better, because no one wants to be policeman one, but they are interested in being, Guillaume. Have I forgotten the second part of the question?
Yeah, it was about which ending was most difficult to decide on.
Yeah, the ending, yeah. I think Greg and Tom, it felt we had this idea of he puts there's been a apportioning of goods at the house about who would get what after Logan's death, and he puts a sticker on Greg's head, and we always liked that image, and we kept it, but it was hard to know if we'd. I guess his story was about his corruption, broadly speaking, right? He's a little bit more normal, although he does come from the family, and he gets, in a very normal way, he just gets used to drinking champagne and being in nice cars and hanging around with these people. And so it was hard to get us, without being too on the nose and direct, to find a good ending for him. But we like that image so much that felt like it answered the question.
I think we have time for a couple more.
Thank you. You were talking about the research you were doing in terms of the books about Sumner Redstone and the Murdochs and magazine articles, and I was just wondering, was there a base level of research for the writer's room, or was there someone who, I'm specifically that scene at the end of season 3, the legal and political technicalities, it's intimidating to me. I don't know anything about it, and I'm wondering if a writer went into the room, are they given a reader's list, or books, or is there just one specific person in the room who's, you're the legal business nerd, and will ask you for all the questions about that?
Yeah, I used to want to be a bit more like a professor and give out a reading list and then test people, but I think I gave up on that. So I think I used to recommend a couple of books on Murdoch and one on Redstone and Disney War, but sometimes I used to think that people hadn't maybe read them all, and that's okay. Because we did two things. One, we had a lot of researchers, but we had one in particular, a brilliant woman, Marissa Marr, who worked on the Wall Street Journal, and she would come in quite early often when we'd done our first month that I said we did of talking about the plot and the shapes, and I would pitch her the business parts of it, and I know a certain amount and researched a certain amount, but she would help us figure out what was real and say, oh, you should look at this deal or that, and she would explain to me and the whole room technicalities and details, and we could ask her questions. We want a deal to go wrong at a late stage. How could it happen between X and Y? And so you'd be very welcome in our room. You wouldn't have to worry that you didn't understand every element of a deal, and I wouldn't expect that of the writers, because I should know quite a lot, and then there was Marissa to help us fill in. It was always useful the more people read, because they would bring more stuff to the room, but it could be psychological rather than business. And also, it was always useful for me to have to explain. So I think what happens is they're trying to, Logan's trying to sell the company, but because of the clause in the trust, the kids can block him, right? It's one of those things that, because it's not familiar to me, in a way, having to retell it as a story to the room when you're doing plotting is quite useful, and so you slowly all get on the same page, and you end up knowing more than you thought you would know about corporate trusts, and yeah.
There.
I wanted to ask you about the process. Wondering, I'm going on and off. Wondering, when you have a first draft from another writer, how much rewriting do you actually do, or in order to get your voice, or do they actually sort of learn to have your voice and write it in that voice? And also, when you're the one writing the first draft, how many people, I guess, are coming into the process of the rewriting for your first draft?
Yeah, this is real good nitty-gritty kind of some of the most complicated parts of the process, right? Because you're working together with a group, I write a bunch of the episodes. My fellow writers write sometimes together or alone. And then I'm the showrunner, so I have responsibility for the overall tone. And it's just very delicate. I've worked for a long time in a writing partnership, Sam and me. So I'm at the end of the day, we'd send each other our stuff, and then we would rewrite each other's stuff. And it can be painful and difficult when you've written something that you think is good and the other person changes it. So I have quite a good level of insight of how difficult that can be. So we also did it in the Loop and Thick of It, the Armando projects with me and Simon and Tony, and other people would rewrite each other's work. And it can also be great because you've written something that you know isn't good, and the other person, instead of having that you have to return to it and do it again yourself, the other person takes the responsibility away, and that's a lovely feeling. As writers, we have to have that feeling of ownership and desire to communicate that makes our work good. So one thing I would have to do is to tell people when they join the room, like, I want you because of your talent and your unique voice, but I will do a pass of the scripts, and I have to for the voice of the show. I'm the showrunner, and it has to have one tone overall, and I hope that's not too difficult. And I think being clear at the beginning takes away 90% of the problems, because it's like, I knew that was going to happen. Maybe it feels great because Jesse fixed some things, or maybe it doesn't feel so great because I did kind of love that bit in the scene that he changed, but I knew it was going to happen. And the deal is, I guess, that you get your credit. The person always keeps, that's the name of the person who writes the first draft, or the two people, stays on the script, and they get credit in the world and financially for writing that episode, even though myself and sometimes some other writers, especially as we get close to production, might have to do some work on it. But it's a tricky area, and you have to be very humane and know that writers, all of us, have strong feelings about our work and want it to see it transmitted.
Thank you. In the back.
Morning, Mr. Armstrong. I have a question related to your job as a showrunner and your relationship with the different directors that you may have on the show. When do you know this guy is going to work with me, or this guy is not going to work with me?
So with the directors, it's nice to work with people you worked with before. And so Mark Mylod, who directed the second episode and was like an executive producer and stayed with the show all the way through. He did the one where Logan dies. He's done all the season finales. So it's lovely having that familiarity. Also Becky Martin, who directed most of Peep Show, British director, directed a bunch of episodes. I know her super well, and some of the relationships developed as you went. And then there are the people who come in who are new. I don't think I had any disasters. You know, hopefully you've talked to people about these directors, as you do in the industry. You might ring someone who's worked with them before, and you sound each other out and have a meeting. So nothing ever went really badly, but there are the ones who you particularly connect with. And I'm very collaborative, so I'll be there on set. It's different from doing a movie, having a showrunner around, but also I try to be very respectful of the director's position, and to know that they will want to have a relationship with the actors and the other key crew that is their own unique relationship. And so I need to back away from that and let them. You can't have a director who isn't in charge of the floor of day by day. So if I have something to say, I try and make sure I said it to them first and got their agreement before getting too involved. But yeah, it's another one of the key collaborations. And for the big episodes, I guess I tried to work with people who I knew that we collaborated well. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that they always said yes. Like, one of the reasons Mark Mylod was a good collaborator for me is that we could disagree, and I knew 90% of the time it wasn't my ego or his ego. It was just, I see it like this, or I see it like that. Let's talk about it. Probably both of us have a decent point of view which should be addressed. So it's not that you just want people who are just going to say yes, yes, yes. You want a director who's going to come and say, this is how I think we should do the scene. And then you can, but you also want someone who can, with whom you can say, oh, that's not how I saw it at all. And then you're going to need to go away somewhere and talk about that for half an hour until you come back. But yeah, it's a key collaboration.
I think we have time for one last one. I think last one, no pressure.
I had a question about structuring episodes itself within the season, specifically in regards to the goal of each episode and how you keep the connection to the season overall.
Yeah, it's a good question. That's what I guess that's the, I wouldn't like to, it's very important for me, even though we haven't written all the episodes when we start, as I said, we know the ending, and I also know what all the episodes are going to be. So episode 7, I guess, will be the one where Shiv and Tom have a big argument and their relationship is reset, well, actually almost destroyed. And so at the beginning of the season in the room, you have those arcs, and so you know what. It sounds maybe too mechanical, but it's true. You know what each episode needs to achieve, where you need to get to. Now, if you find that what you need to achieve turns out to be fake or doesn't feel real, and you're sort of doing it to get somewhere else, you can change it. Like, I would never say you can't change it. It's always got to be true, 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 true. That's the main thing. But once you've discovered what the shape of it is that is all true, then you can say, okay, to get to there, by here, we need that relationship to have broken down in such a way. So that's how I would chart it. At the beginning of the season, you don't know the whole story, but you do know what those important staging points I think you're talking about are for each character and each key relationship and each, maybe, in my show, business story.
Well, that's it. Thank you so much for coming. Jesse, thank you so much. This was incredibly inspiring, and it's really fascinating to hear you talk about
Thank you, Clara.
screenwriting.
Thank you.